questions that people have, that would be really great as well. Well, welcome everybody to our monthly Coachmetrix Masterclass. As I was talking before the recording here with Suzanne and others on the call, really our intent here is to bring these coaches together. We've got an amazing community of coaches, a lot of very experienced leadership and executive coaches. And I think we can all support each other in growing our practices and also making an important impression and impact to the coaching community. And as we go through this journey together, we really invite you to connect with each other, to connect with us. Let us know what your experience is like with Coachmetrix. We want to hear about what's working. We want to hear about what's not working. Again, we can't promise we'll change everything, but you have a voice in shaping where this product goes. And together, I think we can make a greater impact on the coaching community as a whole. Here's what we're going to do today. We're going to get very practical in today's session. What we know about the action planning and pulse feedback features is that these features are the differentiators for many coaches. Meaning we keep hearing from coaches that they're winning proposals and new client work because they're able to put in their proposal that they have a methodology for measuring behavioral change in their work. And not many coaches can say that. So we really want to dive in deep. The features themselves aren't that complex, but there is a lot of kind of moving pieces to fully connect all the dots. And so the way that we're going to handle today's masterclass is I'm going to ask you up front, what are the questions that you want answered? So we make sure we get to the things that you really want answered about those, specifically those features. And then we'll deep dive into each of the features. I've got about 8 or 10 tips on each of those features. Frankly, we might not get to everything today, in which case we'll continue this conversation in our next masterclass. So that's where we're headed today. I want to welcome a few other coaches that just joined. Brian, Christina, Jonathan, welcome. Sean, Frank, thanks everybody for joining us today. So mark your calendars. We will continue to do this on a monthly basis. The reg links are not up yet, but same time, same slot each month, November 13th and December 11th. So put a hold on your calendar, and about 2 weeks in advance, we'll get that registration link up. So if you don't know the history of Coachmetrix, I created this product because we needed it in our own business. And what we found is that when clients were working on their action plans that were paper-based, they either didn't, get them completed to the fullest extent possible that would really support behavioral change, or there just wasn't any accountability in the process. And this process of emailing Word documents back and forth, it's an outdated process, and our learners deserve something different. The second driver here is we started to notice that people were moving to the cloud. Again, if you've heard this story before, the chief security officer at a tech company we're working with, he looked down at
all right.
at his.
I'm glad I waited to call you.
Okay, folks, put yourself on mute if you don't mind. Let me see if I can mute everybody. And then, but this is really intended to be an interactive session, so please unmute anytime you've got a comment. But this chief security officer looks down at his desk, looks up at me and says, I haven't used a pen in years. And it started to really hit me, like, we've got to start getting content in a big portion of our programs online. And then really the third piece, which is, I think, the biggest differentiator here for all of us, is the measurement piece, and measuring beyond just reaction. How's the coach doing? What's working in coaching? Like, are leaders actually changing as a result of our coaching? And that's really what drove us to create Coachmetrix. The original version was like, it was on Drupal, like a WordPress format. And then we eventually just rebuilt the whole thing from ground up and launched it out to the world. So that's a little bit about Coachmetrix. And I say that because I want you to know that we use Coachmetrix in our coaching practice too. We've got a separate coaching business, so we continue to use it. We continue to learn just from our own experience, and we want to hear from you as we continue to evolve the platform. So we're deep diving today into the action planning and pulse feedback features. I want to start with you, meaning what questions do you want answered as a result of our time together today? what do you really want to make sure that we get to around action planning and pulse feedback? Anything come to mind for you?
Hello, this is Brian.
Hey, Brian, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing great.
Hopefully you
Thanks. Welcome.
Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm driving. I apologize, but I just signed up, and so I'm getting ready to put in my first pulse survey pretty soon.
Yep.
And I guess my main question, it's much more open-ended, I guess, is what do you see as the most important pieces that you absolutely want to make sure you get right whenever you do it the first time, so I don't go to do the second one and go, oh, now I've learned that.
Yeah.
That'd be my only question or set of questions, I guess, I'd like to throw out there.
Yeah, that's a great question, because there are some things that you can't undo. So I love that question, and I'll take a stab at answering it when we get there, and I'll also probably draw on Robin, because she's on a daily basis talking to our community. Great, thanks for that question, Brian. Who else has a question that you want to make sure that we get to today? Any burning questions to make sure that we get to today? All right.
Hey, Sal, Jonathan here.
Oh, hey, Jonathan, how you doing? Good to see you on the call today.
All right. Hey, I appreciate it. Sorry about not having my mic muted a moment ago, but I hate interrupting somebody's meeting like that. I do have a question.
Yes.
Which is, what's the ideal framing for setting expectations around using the system? I think, I find that the stakeholder language really works when talking to a different coach, another coach. It doesn't always work in communicating, framing out the expectations to the client themselves. So I'd love to hear a little bit of wisdom about how to bring that to life for the client in language that is familiar and or useful to the client.
Okay, great. Got some ideas around that. Thanks, Jonathan. By the way, if any of you are part of the WBEX community, listen to Jonathan's talks because they're outstanding. Any other questions that you want to make sure we get to today? Christina, Suzanne, Susan, Frank, Sean.
This is Suzanne.
Hey, Suzanne.
I have a couple clients I've been working with for more than a year now, and we launched the engagement with the 360 that I did for them. I'm now in the process of migrating them onto Coachmetrix.
Yep.
What is the recommended interaction with pulse feedbacks and a 360 process? And is it something that could potentially replace a 360?
Yep.
Or serve a similar function anyway. It would be maybe a reduced population, but could it take over?
Great. Excellent question. Thanks, Suzanne. Anything else that you're butting up against, Suzanne, as you start on this platform?
I have a wish list of a couple things,
Yeah.
but they have more to do with branding than anything else.
Okay.
I had my web developer build a link to the site into my website, but I'd love to change a few things on fonts and colors and things like that, but it's a wish list. It doesn't affect the functionality.
Send the wish list into our support link. You can find it on any page, because we do track those. And when we start seeing like multiple coaches saying the same thing, it starts really elevating that. So awesome. Good to know. Well, why don't I jump in? And if there's more questions you want to make sure I capture, folks, please, I want to make this as usable as we can. So I'm going to go through a few elements of the action planning feature first. Then we're going to get back. Then we'll go to pulse feedback, which all those questions were about. And I want to go to the action planning piece first, because the action planning component really is, we've got to have the action plan in place. before the pulse feedback process can start. So let me just adjust my screen. I'm going to kind of show my PowerPoint and my Coachmetrix at the same time. So let me just check. Hey, Robin, when you see my screen right now, is the Zoom video showing up, or is it just the PowerPoint and Coachmetrix?
I'm just seeing the PowerPoint.
Are you seeing Coachmetrix as well? Oh no, you're just seeing the PowerPoint. Hold on. Thank you. I'm glad I asked that question, because I'm going to share my entire screen instead of just now. What can you see?
Can see both.
Okay, terrific. Awesome. All right. So a couple of things about the action planning. Let me just demonstrate a few things, and I want to get into some specific tips. So you all probably know this. When I go into my participants account, either the coach or the participant can create the action plan. Now, our philosophy is to have the participant do it, because we just think that creates more ownership. But frankly, once in a while, we coach an executive where we will take that over. To create the action plan, you're going to click on this plus button. There's 3 components to the action plan. We've kept it very simple, so it's as flexible as possible for you. A goal statement, a behavioral statement, and then some details. After you add your supporters into Coachmetrix, they show up in each goal. But if you haven't added your supporters, this whole section of the action plan, it doesn't show up. And this is going to be important, because you do have the ability to choose different supporters for different goals. And I'll get to that in a little while. So it's very simple to create a new goal. And there's a couple features around the goal once you've created it, and we'll get into some of that here in a moment. The first tip that I want to share with you is to use the collections feature to demonstrate to clients what a good action plan would look like. So I'm amazed at how difficult it is for people to create an action plan. I just assume that it's a relatively easy thing to do. And by the way, I'm talking about executives too. It's really interesting to watch senior leaders struggle with creating a solid action plan. So one of the things that we've done is we've created a resource. Remember, you've got this resource feature where you can build content. Most of the time, we already have a ton of content as coaches. It's really, in many cases, just a copy and paste and cleaning it up a little bit. But any combination of, excuse me, documents, video, text, links, you can use to create a resource. So what we've done is we've created a resource that we call Create Your Action Plan. And that resource consists of a welcome message text to Colleen, this person that we're coaching, some instructions on what to do next, which is go back to this part of Coachmetrix. We just took a screenshot of Coachmetrix and slid it into this resource. Go back into that dashboard and create your action plan. And by the way, there are 3 steps below on how to create your action plan. And so we built 3 separate resources, one resource for creating SMART goals, another resource for identifying behaviors, and another resource for creating action items. And it's just some simple instructions on all 3 of those different parts of the action planning process. How to create your behaviors, and then adding action items. And our philosophy, and your philosophy may be different, but our philosophy is keep it simple, concise, but clear. Goal statement, behavioral statement, and then in that open-ended box, add 2 things: action items with bullet points and what support the client needs. Now, you may have a different philosophy, so that's fine, but the point of this first tip is give your clients a resource to help create their action plans that are easy to use. Let me pause there for any questions or reactions to that tip, if there's anything that comes up for you.
I do have a question about that. One of my clients kind of jumped in and went crazy on her goals and actions right away. Mm-hmm. And she entered the same goal 3 times because she wanted 3 different behavior statements to be evaluated.
Yes.
Is that a good way to approach it, or is there a more recommended way?
No, that is. So right now, our action plan feature, and that's a great question, Suzanne. We get that question a lot. Right now, our action plan feature only allows for one behavior for each goal. So that means, and so the current workaround is if you do want to have just one goal but measure multiple behaviors, you have to do exactly what your client did,
Okay.
which is same exact goal, but a different behavior for each goal.
Okay,
We
thank you.
do have, I'll just let you know, we do have in the development pipeline the ability to have multiple behaviors for each goal. So that is coming. I don't really want to commit to when, but I'd say probably within the next 3 months, that feature will be built out. So
Okay.
that's really great. Great, really good question. Any other questions about this idea of creating a collection with sample action plans? All right, the second tip is really similar, and it even precedes the 360 process. So Suzanne, I might even answer your 360 question that you've got. So oftentimes what happens in coaching, we may get our coachees on Coachmetrix early. I mean, if you've seen any of our past master classes, like we get them on in the first coaching engagement session so that their welcome packet comes through Coachmetrix as a resource. We're immediately starting discussions, but the actual data isn't really going to start until that action plan is built. And so oftentimes there's a 360 process before clients create goals. Now that may look different in your coaching engagement or coaching methodology. We created a resource that helps our clients reflect on their 360 data, right? So let's say you have a coaching session and you share those 360 results with your coachee, and then they've got time to reflect on that data between, your 2 coaching sessions with them. We send them a resource, and this resource again has a little welcome message, and then it's got 6 different modules, and they're very simple. What were your reactions to the data? Number 2, what were the patterns or messages that came out, the strengths and opportunities for development? Number 3, how did these different rater groups compare with their feedback? Number 4, what's the ideal image you have for yourself as a leader? And then number 5, go back to the action planning area and start creating your action plan with an image. And so just an idea to help your participants through that 360 process, if that's part and tied into your action plan. Let me pause there, then I'm going to answer Suzanne's question about the 360. Any questions or reactions to that?
Yeah, I'll throw in. And do you guys have, I think I picked on Robin about this when I talked to her last week. Do you have just like a to-do list or an onboarding list? It's like, okay, you've got a new solo client or you've got a new team client, and just kind of the right order and syntax to go through the steps in to make sure we don't program in something wrong or just don't spend hours looking for everything.
I love that. That's a great question. I'd point you to two tools. Hey, Robin, the checklist that you create, is that in the knowledge base or on the community page?
It's in both.
Okay, great. Excellent. So
you go, Robin.
Yeah, you go, Robin. Exactly. So Sean, inside of the knowledge base, and you can find the knowledge base on any page in Coachmetrix. It says knowledge base in the upper right. When you scroll down, project checklist is right here. So that'll give you all the things to set up. And then also we created this quick start guide. And this is generally the order in which we run our projects. And so for each of these steps, you'll find some narrative as well as some quick videos. Gotcha. I want to go back to a question that Jonathan had months ago, which is, it's also important to understand the syntax of Coachmetrix. So different words mean different things. We elected to call those tiles projects, and we call our coachees participants. And we did that because a lot of our users are using this for other types of programs like leadership development programs or team development programs, not just coaching. And so a coachee language didn't make sense. So we also in here have a definition of terms that you should look at early in the process, Sean. That might help out as well.
All right, perfect. Thanks.
So, Jonathan, we had that in our knowledge base, but it was buried somewhere. So we took it out of where it was buried, and we elevated it up almost immediately after that phone call you and I had a while ago.
Does that mean that form is now officially a zombie?
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So it's there, but then no one sees it, right?
I'll shut my microphone off now.
Yeah. You asked the question, Suzanne, about can the pulse feedback process replace the 360? We didn't design the program to do that. It doesn't mean it can't, but we typically see Coachmetrix as the tool that you use after the 360 process has been completed, or after you've done some kind of assessment. It could be a personality style. Maybe you've done confidential interviews, to provide that ongoing measurement on whether that leader's changing or not. It doesn't mean that you couldn't create a short 360. There's no limit, I don't think, on the number of questions that you can ask in that, or the number of goals that you can create. It just might start to get overwhelming for your coachee. But if they've got, let's say they do have just 3 primary goals for their coaching engagement, instead of running a 360, yeah, you actually could just run a really short 360 inside of Coachmetrix with those 3 questions and use that as a tool. We didn't intend for it to be used only that way, but I could see that as being a workaround. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. My experience with 360s after about 20 plus years of them is that what really, really, really counts in the long run is, what is this person doing well? What does this person need to focus on doing next? And I can imagine a really skinny down 360 that asked that could be done even as a baseline through the pulse feedbacks, and then whatever.
You just follow up.
Every quarter or whatever. So,
Yep.
Okay,
Great.
thank you.
I love that idea. The third tip that we have, some people don't realize this is available, is to be able to share your action plan. And so once the action plan is built, there's a button that suddenly appears called Share Action Plan. And either the coach or the coachee can use that feature. And it literally emails an action plan to whoever you want to send it to. And it shows you exactly what's getting sent. So anything that's within the body of that goal, the goal statement, the behavioral statement, and additional context or additional content will get sent. Open-ended or comments that, there's that feature where the coach can comment on an action plan. None of those comments and discussions get sent, just the action plan itself. So when do we do this? We can send action plans to a coach's manager. Oftentimes you might have a calibration meeting where you meet with the coachee and their manager. It's a great time to use that feature. You might send it out to their coach's supporters or their stakeholders. And part of the stakeholder-centered coaching methodology is, 1, get clear on what you want to work on. Number 2, go public with your action plan. Number 3, follow up. I mean, at its simplest level, that's what it's about. And so you could use this feature to share the action plan with the participants' supporters. It's another good way to use the feature. Any questions, reactions to that one? All right, let's keep going. Don't forget there's the ability to comment on action plans. So once there's a goal that's set in there, you can add comments as the coach, and you can start like a 2-way exchange between the coachee and the participant. The coach and the participant. So it's a great way to check in on action plans. I just had a coach the other day, a coaching session the other day, and the coach, the participant, when they finish their first draft of the action plan, they're going to share it with me through that feature I just told you about. And then that'll prompt me to go in here and make some comments on their action plan. So it's a great way to add value, check in with your clients, or just comment and help them create those action plans. Tip number 5 is, once you've started that pulse feedback process, there's a great opportunity to start updating the action items within the action plan. So for example, as Greg's getting feedback and feed forward, there's some comments in here. Keep doing this, or one idea for the future is to do that. What Greg can do, and you would probably have to guide him to do this, is to look at those open-ended pulse feedback comments and then go back in his action plan and modify the action items. Not the goal or the behavior, but just the actions that he or she's going to take, let's say over the next 30 or 45 days. So that's a great way to really integrate the measurement with what the leader's doing. A word of caution. Okay, so back to Sean, was it your question, the things that you should not be doing or be aware of, or maybe that was Brian?
It was more just making sure we don't do them out of order or something, so we don't build
Gotcha.
something in that we can't get rid of.
Yeah, okay, so this is one area where coaches sometimes stumble a little bit, which is once a goal is set and once that pulse feedback process has started, you can change the goal itself and you can change the details of the goal without any issue. As soon as you change the behavioral statement, things begin to change and they could unintentionally get complicated. So this really is an important one. If I know that Greg's working on, let's say, this first goal of encouraging open dialogue in team meetings, this is the behavioral statement that we're tracking with Greg. If Greg goes in and says, I want to change, and we started the pulse feedback process, and Greg goes in and says, I'm going to change this to, I'm going to encourage people to do X, Y, and Z, just a different behavior. What will happen is the behavior that we've been tracking will stop. It will continue to show up on this graph. There'll be a new behavior that's added to this graph, and then that new behavior in a different color begins to get tracked. So there is an impact if you make a change to the behavioral statement once the pulse feedback process has started. So that's something to be aware of. That makes sense. Any questions on that one?
Hey, Sal.
Yeah, Frank.
Yeah, just so the other side of that though is something I've done recently with a client, which is he had goals that were set for the CEO and board chair, and those went that direction, and then for his sales team that came,
Nice.
you know, more different goals. But
Yeah.
then we evolved those over time, and so we created a new goal and a new behavior that tied
Great.
to it. And
Yes.
so I get what you're saying, but there's also kind of this other flexibility bonus that you have over. I mean, I've worked with this guy since, you know, mid 2019, so
Right.
for a long time now. So we're always trying to find ways to pick this up and to keep this really relevant and on point with him. And I'll just add one other comment, which is I went back and looked at some feedback just in the last round. It was like the 8th round of feedback. And there was something that was said that was like so perfect. It got me, like we spent half the time this last week talking about that one statement, which was keep spelling it out for me or for us or something like that. And it was like, let's take about a half an hour and talk about that, because you have to understand what a great bit of feedback that is.
Yeah, I love that.
Anyway, yeah. Well,
a couple of things. One, you're doing it intentionally, which is exactly how we designed it, Frank. So, you know, big thumbs up for that. Where coaches or coachees, participants get in trouble is when they change that goal without realizing it's going to actually impact the data. So as long as you're doing it intentionally, that's exactly how we designed it. And then number two, you know, one of the tips I had around pulse feedback, I'll just say it now because Frank said it, is a couple of things. Number one, it's great to pull up the data inside of a coaching session, because it can really spur some great conversation. And just like Frank said, that one, you know, 10-word comment all of a sudden led into a really in-depth coaching conversation. So leverage these open-ended comments. Know that the way those open-ended comments are framed in the survey are as feed forward. right? Marshall Goldsmith talks a lot about feed forward. And the idea is to get ideas and suggestions for the future so that as the coach, you can help the participant change their future. Can't do anything about the past, but these comments could lead to some future actions and really in-depth conversation in your coaching. Different supporters for different goals. I don't know if you know this feature exists or not. Many people don't. So typically the process, Brian, back to your question, was that action plan gets in place. After the action plan gets in place, next step, add your supporters. I highly recommend that your participant has a conversation with their supporters to enroll them before they add them to the system, right? This is ultimately really more about conversation than it is about Coachmetrix, so that your supporters don't get some email from Coachmetrix that they don't expect. But step one, get that action plan in place. Step two, add your supporters. When you add your supporters, all of your supporters are automatically attached to all of your goals. But Frank just mentioned he's got a client, person might be working on some goals that are more related to his or her sales team, and then another goal that's really more related to interaction with the C-suite. So you could have different supporters attached to different goals. When that supporter is added, they're automatically attached to each goal. Click on the goal, go back into the goal itself and edit it. And if you don't, if you want Stacy to be part of it, but you don't want Aaron to be part of that goal, just remove or add each person, and that person won't get the survey. So it's a nice way to differentiate your goals, and especially if you're using a 360 where people are getting, different feedback from different rater groups, that can be helpful. Any questions on that? All right, I'm going to keep going because we have a lot more tips. Also, another little known feature that people may not know about, when you're in your project, we've been adding more and more data to these participant tiles. This is helpful when you're managing a coaching engagement with multiple people on a project to just get a quick snapshot. All right, I look at Greg. Okay, Greg's got 3 goals, 4 supporters, 3 rounds of pulse feedback. We've got 1 assignment that's out to him. And for many of you, you have multiple coaches on your team. I know that Coach Jim is assigned to Greg. Sal is assigned to Susan, and she hasn't signed in like a year. We've had 3 rounds of pulse feedback. So this is especially helpful if you're in the early phase of an engagement with a lot of people, just to get a snapshot and say, all right, Greg doesn't have any goals yet, or Sally's doesn't have any goals yet. And it can prompt a really quick reminder. So we've been adding more data to these tiles to just be able to give you that snapshot. That's just a quick tip that you may or may not have known about. All right, let's talk about Coachmetrix. And I want to get to, as a starting point for this, Jonathan, your ideal framing around describing expectations to the client. I'll tell you how I do it, and then what I would say is I'd love to open this one up to conversation. Can you all see this chart I just pulled in called How Coachmetrix Works? This is how we do it, Jonathan, meaning at the beginning, like in our intake coaching session, we pull up this PDF and we explain the roadmap. And as we're working through those early stages of an engagement where that assessment is started, we pull this up again so that people can visually see it, which is step 1, we have some kind of assessment. Step 2, you're going to have time to reflect on it. Step 3, you're going to create an action plan. Step 4, you're going to calibrate that action plan with your manager so we don't get to the end of the engagement, you focused on all the wrong things. Once all these steps are done, then we begin the pulse feedback process. So Brian, this also could help you think about the ordering of your engagement. So a couple of things. One, this document is available for you on our community page. So you might remember we recently launched a community page. You'll see the link in the upper right of every single page. And when you click on that community link, it's going to take you to some sales support materials we have, some delivery support, our new partner program that we've soft launched, but you'll hear more information about that. And then all of these masterclass recordings. That How Coachmetrix Works is the first thing that's up here. So you can download that. And by the way, give it to your graphic designer and have him or her change it if you want. We don't care. Anything you can to communicate the expectations. So let me pause there. Jonathan, is that helpful? And I'd also love to hear how other coaches are setting up or really framing how you describe the expectations of Coachmetrix in your coaching engagement with your clients.
Can you really quickly, Sal, show me again where that PDF is? Because that PDF will handle 99% of my challenges.
Awesome. Yeah, very simple. So
okay,
yeah, on any page inside of Coachmetrix, once you're inside the actual application, in the upper right-hand side, you're going to notice this community link. If you click on that, it will open a second page. And we purposely keep it as a separate tab so you can keep both things open. And then once you're in that community resources page, we've got that how Coachmetrix works infographic right there.
Perfect. That's the how Coachmetrix works. Perfect.
Yeah, exactly. There's also a pitch deck, a script demo, a demo script, a video that you can share with your clients, a logo. You can use our Coachmetrix authorized partner logo, definitions of terms, so you can even share those terms with your clients. Here's the project checklist that Robin created. Here's a sample email for you to enroll your supporters. So we're adding more things over time, and at some point in time, we'll make this page look nicer, but we just wanted to get these resources out there as quickly as possible.
That's great. I don't know how I missed that existed.
We just launched it about, I don't know, a month ago or so, Jonathan. So, it's easy to miss if you didn't see an email or our announcement. Frank and or others that have been around for a while, how are you positioning Coachmetrix at the beginning of your engagement? So, to Jonathan's question, they have that ideal framing. Is there anything different that you're doing?
Well, I recently had a conversation with a prospective coach, and in sort of discussing the process, this person was he followed the DISC. This person was very much a C engineering type, wanted to know about the process, the steps, the detail, all that stuff. And so this was so easy to talk about, and of course to talk about the ROI. So I think that just for me, the way to kind of frame it with a level of confidence, this is going to be a good engagement that I feel, and that I think that the prospective coachee will feel as well. So it kind of helps even in those initial conversations that are really more like, proposal reviews conversations. And then once we get started, it's like, okay, this is what remember we talked about this. This is how we're going to, we just very smoothly just bring them in and on, and it just seems to flow. So I don't think I would add anything specific, Sal, to what you already talked about, but just as a more sort of more, kind of a broader statement about how this has helped me.
Nice, that's great. Any other tips from folks that have used Coachmetrix for a while and how you're setting framing the tool and in the context of your coaching engagement? I think the biggest thing we're doing, Jonathan, one, we assumptively use it. We don't ask our clients permission if they want to use it. And then number two, we use that, we map that process out. And for those highly conscientious people, they love Coachmetrix because everything's there and it's very logical. And so that's been our experience, at least. I'm going to go on to some pulse feedback tips. And this is really going to start getting back to your question of what are the most important pieces to get right? One of the most important pieces to get right from the beginning is getting your project settings right. And just thinking through your project settings. None of it's complicated, but you do want to get these right. And so once you create a project, there's this little wheel icon in the upper right called project settings. When you click on that, it brings up some critical settings. Your pulse feedback rounds. How many rounds of pulse feedback do you want to have happen throughout your engagement? Number two, the type of feedback chart that you'll use. And so we've kind of generically labeled them a traditional chart, which we just really mean a scale of like 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, whatever scale you want to use. Or we call it a progress format, which is really more of the methodology that Marshall Goldsmith advocates for in stakeholder-centered coaching, which is a 7-point scale of -3 to +3. But it could be negative number, it could be -5 or -7 to +5 or +7. And negative numbers indicate the client's getting worse. 0, there's been no change. Positive numbers, the client's getting better. So you choose your pulse feedback type, you set the scale, and then you can choose whether the pulse feedback comments are either open, meaning you know exactly who made those comments, or we call partially anonymous because it hides their avatar, just kind of darkens out their avatar. And then finally, you can check or uncheck the pulse feedback reminder feature, which will automatically send out pulse feedback reminders to people who haven't, to participants and supporters who haven't completed their pulse feedback. Okay, so now where are some stumbling points with our customers that we see? Number one, you can change the number of pulse feedback rounds anytime within the engagement. So there's not a lot of issue there. We have landed on 4 in our engagements over the years. We initially started with 6 in, let's say, a 6-month engagement. We scaled that back to 4. So we think in terms of about every 45 days, a pulse feedback round goes out. We found that every 30 days, we were over surveying participants and we were getting a less engagement from supporters. And we like the idea of having ongoing pulse feedback instead of like the mini survey philosophy that Marshall has, which is once every 6 months or once a year, I'm going to have a survey go out. I would rather have the data more often as a leader. Again, this is our philosophy. It does not necessarily right, so that I can make change ongoing. But you could certainly say, I'm running a 6-month engagement and I just want 1 round of pulse feedback or 2 rounds of pulse feedback. Or I'm running a 1-year engagement and I only want 2 rounds, more like a mini survey format like Marshall. That totally works as well. You're not going to get in much trouble here because you can always come back and add more pulse feedback rounds as the engagement starts. Once you have set, now this is the part where this is like the aha to watch out for. Once you've set your pulse feedback type and then you've started pulse feedback, we can't change the format. Because if we're collecting data on a -3 to +3 scale, and then all of a sudden you change it to a 1 to 5 scale, we just can't make the numbers match up. So once you select the pulse feedback type and you begin the pulse feedback, we can't change the type of scale you're using or the range of the scale. So these things will lock up. So just know that's a really important one. And the other thing is the pulse feedback settings will also lock once the pulse feedback process starts. So let me pause there for questions. These are a few important things to know. All of what I said is in here in this small text, but it's easy to miss or skip over. What are your questions about some of these project settings? Go ahead, Suzanne.
I have a couple questions. One is, in my enthusiasm, I launched all my clients onto this and set up projects without doing any of this yet. Okay, but nor have I launched any pulse feedbacks. I can still set it now?
Yes. Okay. Yeah,
and
you can go ahead and change the settings.
Okay, and the other question then is, do you make some of these decisions in collaboration with your client? Do you ask them how anonymous they want these things to be or how frequently they want the pulse feedbacks?
You could. Our clients, at least maybe in an engagement where we haven't worked with them before, we typically will not ask them, although that doesn't mean it's right. When I work with a client over time, like we worked with a COO at a tech company and like we were on our 3rd or 4th phase of coaching, and he had a really good sense of how Coachmetrix worked. And also the organization had matured to a point where open-ended feedback and exactly who's giving you feedback became the norm. So yes, you can certainly ask them, but have a point of view if your clients may not, or they may not know what's best.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Other questions about this page? This is it's an easy page to use, but it's also a really important one.
I have a question about expectations.
Yes.
And if it's not the right place, or there's a better resource or a different time to talk about it, just let me know. But
Yep.
my background as it relates to behavior adjustments and 360 feedback and accountability and that kind of thing is being sensitive to confidentiality with the leader
Yes.
that I'm coaching. And I'm drawn to this Coachmetrix because I want to have the measurable reference of positive change, but I also want to be sensitive to the confidentiality that I promise. Do you have any best practice recommendations on sort of how it flows as you begin to collect scores and what is or isn't shared with the boss or the HR?
Yeah.
The way I've done it typically is you don't have to share it. It's up to the person being coached, but we encourage you to, but it's not a requirement.
Yep.
I'm just curious as it relates to kind of proving progress and that sort of thing, if you had any tips on best practices there.
Yeah, I'll share what we do and my thoughts. And again, it's not necessarily right. And I think what we've built this tool so that you can integrate your own philosophies. Would also love to hear from some other coaches. I think at the most basic level, it starts with really clear coaching agreements up front. So no matter what you do, make sure those are spoken about. What we do is we typically will meet with our executive sponsors once a month throughout a coaching engagement. And we have a standard PowerPoint deck where we share progress on the project, observations that we see, recommendations that we have, and then measurement data. And the measurement that we show is the graph only. We don't show the pulse feedback process, but we just take a screenshot of this graph and we put it into our PowerPoint. But that's an agreement that we create at the beginning of an engagement with both the coachee and the sponsor. So I'd leave it there. And anybody else have any other best practices that you're using around confidentiality of the actual data? It's a great question. It's an important one. And we've noticed different coaches have different philosophies on this.
I guess the only question I have, Sal, is about you all internally, about how super protected you are from this system being hacked or it being protected, as I'm trying to get C-level people to be honest about their own journaling and comments they're putting forward.
Yeah, that's a really great question. We have some supporting technology documents that we can send to you, Suzanne, that can answer some of those specific, more technical questions and that you can share with your clients. We know our clients oftentimes will go through some kind of security audit of some sort when they're using systems like this with the companies. So we've got some security overview documents of Coachmetrix, and then also of the facilities that we use, like Amazon Web Services, AWS, and other hosting services, things like that. So we can provide that separately if you'd like.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. I'm going to keep going. I'm sorry, who asked that question? Was that Brian?
Yes, it was me.
Okay, Brian, did that help? Did we get to
I think it helps me. Yeah, I think it helps me understand the way you guys do it.
Okay.
And yeah, I think I'm curious. I would love, I mean, again, I think it's probably a deeper conversation, but I'd love to maybe pose it out later. I don't know if you have a forum or whatever, but I'd love to hear if other coaches are if 90% of them do it the same way, or if there's some sort of a hybrid of some authorization of the participant sort of thing. So yeah, but thank you for clarifying the way
absolutely.
you guys do it.
Maybe let's just take one more minute. It is a good question. Anyone else have a point of view on how you share the data? If you share it at all, and maybe you don't share it. All right. So yeah, well, let us figure out a way, Brian, to get that out to our community and see what people are doing. I know that we have some coaches that there's a reporting feature here. And so you can actually dump all of that pulse feedback data into a spreadsheet. And we have some coaches that are like wizards with Excel, and they take that data and then they create their own graphs. So, you know, we're kind of at complete privacy to a lot of transparency and everything in between. I think one, make sure you just have clear agreements as a starting point. People know what to expect, and you know, play around with different options. A couple other tips. We talked about the scale, optimizing the frequency, not surveying people too much, but having enough surveys so you've got meaningful data. We personally have landed on 4 rounds of pulse feedback when we're doing a 6-month coaching engagement with a frequency of every 45 days. It's about the people. It's really not about Coachmetrix. So what does that mean? Number one, the methodology, as I mentioned earlier, is get clear on what you're working on. That's the action plan. Go public with the plan. So enroll, we encourage our participants to enroll their supporters verbally. Hey, I'm in this leadership development program or coaching program with Frank. I'm working on these 3 things. Will you be a supporter for me? And here's what that means. One, you're going to get a monthly pulse feedback survey. It'll take you about 1 minute to complete, and your input's going to be really helpful for my development. That's about it. It's a 2-minute conversation. Back on that community page, we've got some information here on how to, just some text that you can take and steal on how to enroll supporters. So one, it's really about the people. And then number 2, also between rounds of pulse feedback, we encourage our participants to go back to their supporters and say, hey, I've been working on being more open in my meetings. How have I done these last 30 days? What do you recommend, or what's your ideas for the next 30? So we're reminding people on what you're working on. So you're not only getting ideas to change that behavior, but you're also changing perception. So part of the stakeholder-centered methodology is changing both behavior and perception. And from my standpoint, it's harder to change how other people see you or think about you than it is for you to actually change the behavior yourself. I want to show, we just made some recent improvements to the Pulse feedback page, and we're excited to hear any feedback that you have about this. But we simplified the page. So if I am working with Greg Smithy and I'm getting ready to send out some pulse feedback, or I want to check on his pulse feedback, when I click on automated pulse feedback, we've completely redesigned this page. So number one, we get a lot of questions about, hey Sal, what does that feedback survey email look like? Well, you can now click on a link right here to see exactly what it's going to look like. And it will even bring Greg's name in. It will tell you the number of rounds that he's got. So you can see exactly what your supporters and participants will be responding to. So that is on the page every time you click on it. We've simplified how this looks. When you click on Enable Pulse Feedback, you can then set the frequency, and you can set the date of when you want that pulse feedback to start. And we're also providing more information here. So at a snapshot, you can see where this participant is. This participant has had 4 rounds of pulse feedback. They're using the progress scale of -2 to +2. They've got a partially anonymous privacy setting, and reminders are on. And by the way, here's when the last 3 rounds of pulse feedback went out. So we've simplified this page. We're adding a little more information, and you can see what sample surveys look like. Any questions on what's here? All right, we got a few minutes. Let's see if I can get through a couple more of these tips. Recent activities. We get a lot of questions about, hey, how many people completed my survey? When you, if you're working with Greg and you kind of land on his page here, if you click on the pulse feedback link and scroll down to his pulse feedback comments, there's this little text here that says status. It tells you when the last round of feedback was responded to and the number of surveys that were submitted. That includes the participant survey. If you just want a snapshot of how engaged your supporters are, you can get that here. And if you want to go back to previous rounds of pulse feedback, you can do that as well. Tip number 7, close the gap, meaning there's 2 sets of data here. There is data from a self-survey as well as data from the participants. In this particular survey, you're not seeing Greg's data. Let's see if this is some bad sample data. But when those pulse surveys go out, the participant and the supporter will respond to those surveys. And if the participant responds, you'll know that he or she responded because their avatar will have their picture or their initials, right? And so it's the participants' accounts. We're not violating any confidentiality here, but it will allow the participant to see how they are scoring themselves compared to other people.
Sal, you can see that in round 3 if you toggle to
Right. Yeah, thank you for telling me that. Okay, great. So in round 3, we can see this is Greg's account. This is Greg. And these are the comments he's making in response to this survey item. He scored himself a 2. Other people scored him a 1. It's showing up graphically over here. So you can help the leader. You can coach to that gap. Let's see if I added any more tips. We already talked about that, how Coachmetrix works. Infographic, use it. It really helps to communicate the process. So we blew through all of the tips that we had. We got all the questions answered. Feel free to email me directly if there's anything I can support you with. We also have a great team of support folks. Robin leads that team. So you can get more support from us directly from the website, either through our knowledge base. We do encourage you to go there first, or send us a support ticket if there's any questions that you've got. Join us for the next Coachmetrix Masterclass in November. We'll also send out a recording of this session today that'll be posted on the community page. Thanks everybody for joining me, and hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.